exhibition, come historical saga, come entertainment that sets out within an hour to tell as much as possible of the story of a fairly unique city.
The story of Sydney is very much the story of Australia, especially in the first 20 or 30 years. Everything that happened in Australia was focused on Sydney.
The story of Sydney will attract Sydney-siders. It's being designed for Sydney-siders. It's a very warm, affectionate and creative look at our city by our people.
I think it's the emotional involvement that is so exciting in the project. People are going to be utterly unprepared for being so emotionally moved and transported by the experience.
It's superbly located for what it was that we wanted to do. It's right on George Street and also just behind the overseas terminal. It has frontage also to Bethel Steps. Under George Street also was the Mariners' Church, and it just seemed just right for us to be in a building that had been designed for sailors, because Sydney was very much a seaport.
Well, working in a building that is classified historic means you can't touch the fabric of the building. You can't alter the walls, and you can't touch the ceilings and the floors, for instance. So the design has to be contained within that unit and expose certain elements to be seen by the public, as well as containing the elements we want to put in there. And so we're putting in very contemporary images that are also housed within a very historic frame. When the people enter the story of Sydney, they pass down a sort of a tunnel, and there's a soundscape that gives a sense of somehow passing into another dimension. And the soundscape has just sounds of the modern city and the old city, the birds, the bells, whatever you like. But you just get this sense of moving towards something. Also integrated into that is some kind of involvement to enable the audience to have some sense of what they will experience as they go through, and the kind of feeling of what this walk through and experience will be. From then, the audience moves into an area where they see on the wall what appears to be really like a painting, like some kind of American naturalist painting, and it's very detailed. What they don't understand is that this is a very, very early morning shot of pretty much the view of Circular Quay from the very building they're standing in. And once the experience begins, that picture is revealed to be a time-lapse film that rolls back a little way and then quickly moves into a series of paintings and photographs. Paintings by every major painter, some not so major, but a lot of very interesting current painters, and everybody, Brett Whiteley, Charles Condor, Arthur Streeton, you name anybody who's painted Sydney, they'll be in there, Margaret Preston, etc., etc. So we sort of move back through the 20th century into the 19th century. We cover some of the great Australian photographers like Mike Stupin and Casno and other photographs, and then we begin to move back into the kind of colonial painters until we get back to Watling and John Eyre and the very earliest sketches of Sydney, until in 2 minutes we're suddenly there and there's Sydney Cove untouched, by white man's hand anyway. That wall dissolves and we're in a newsroom, and I chose the date line December the 17th, 1796, because that year seemed to me, after a certain amount of looking around, as being a great year to go in. I didn't want to go in and say this is the year it all started, because same old story, you know, clanking of convicts, what a terrible trip that was, and oh look, there's a black man, and that's the thing that's become a sort of a myth thing, that we can't even begin to experience what that experience must have been like. But I thought by taking 1796, it was a very good time to place Sydney in some kind of context. To say this is what's happening in the whole wide world, and a lot of it pertains to Australia. And that news begins, in fact, with scenes of the French Revolution, with the newsreader saying what began 7 years ago as a popular uprising of the French people took Europe into deep crisis today, with Napoleon kind of marching into Lombardy and Mantua. And it also, because of the recent resignation of Washington, can bring in the American War of Independence and therefore show that all these things are integrally tied up together.
That little sequence ends with the first hint of what the problem with the rum trade. The doors open, you go into another area. That area is specifically about Bligh, and Bligh being overthrown in the first, kind of like the first major revolution, upheaval. And it was all because Bligh had been sent out from England to just put an end to this kind of wholesale corruption that was happening. So what we do by using a lot of film about Bligh, and therefore we see Charles Lawton, Trevor Howard, Anthony Hopkins, all as Bligh. We see Mel Gibson, Marlon Brando, and Clark Gable playing Fletcher Christian. I've counterbalanced those films by doing little sequences of films equally sort of as though in period, where we have Ron Graham and Eugene Gilfedder doing one, Governor King and MacArthur. We've got another one with Bob Baines and Nichola Seedy, and one with Graham Harvey and John Paramore. What happens in this sequence, we not only understand what's happening with rum, but in 7 minutes or just thereabouts, we get a whole idea of just what two irascible, intemperate, difficult men MacArthur and Bligh were, and two such unlikely people to confront each other, both believing that they were always right and that they would always win, both causing each other's ruin, and therefore ending a certain segment of very angry, very difficult period in the early time of Sydney. That's what's resolved in that room.
It's certainly been a hell of a challenge, because so many different formats have been used on this show, and we've, in a sense, tested all the. We've taken all the existing technology really to its limit, and we've done things, video post-production facilities that have even amazed them, because they didn't think it was possible to actually do. The initial thing that we had to decide was, considering we were using 35mm, Super 35 anamorphic videotape, 16mm, even 16mm anamorphic, was how we were going to edit it all, because we had to sort of get it all onto one format where it could be edited. So we decided to edit on Betacam, and from there we'll actually sort of online and then eventually put it onto Laserdisc.
The way the story's going to be told is quite different to the way it would be told if it was a audio-visual or a corporate expose. It's certainly a lot more theatrical. Primarily Rodney Fisher being the driving force behind that is what makes that different. That's part of the way the whole scheme of things is going. So I guess it's those things that make it special and different, because we're working very much like somewhere between making a film, somewhere between making a documentary, somewhere between putting together a piece of theatre, as well as an audio-visual experience.
For Macquarie's efforts, he had the good fortune, and maybe somebody else wouldn't have noticed that Francis Greenway was there, but Macquarie was looking for an architect, and in Francis Greenway he found that he had an architectural genius who could bestow his gifts on this colony. And that's why Macquarie is so important to us, because there are so many buildings in Sydney that still exist. Macquarie created St James's Church, the Hyde Park Barracks, the obelisk in Macquarie Square, etc., etc. The centre, still the inner room of the Supreme Court, that we still have churches, all sorts of things. The portico on Parramatta, the old government house at Parramatta. So we get this sort of sense, and out of that we go into, he talks to us, he welcomes us to Sydney, and he says to us, wander as you will, and John Bell is playing that part, and he just seems to have the very right quality there. And when he says wander as you will, we actually sort of drift into paintings, and most importantly we drift into the paintings done by Major Taylor in 1820, which were 3 paintings. There should have been a 4th. It was meant to be a complete panorama. Why he didn't finish them, who knows. But he did 3, and he did the 3 main and important sections that show the whole of Sydney. So what we've done with the expertise of Paul Nicola bringing a painting to life, we've placed into those paintings the people, and those people do come to life.
To do that, we've had to integrate live action elements, people shot against a blue screen. We've had to do shots of the painting itself, which has had to be blended by an artist. It's had to be reproduced. We've had to remove the painted people out of the scene, put our people in the scene, and because on top of that, to give the whole image